And one of the things that a national cinema should be doing for us is recontextualizing the Canadian experience to make it feel for a lot of us like a place where we'd love to stick around.
The Kingston Canadian Film Festival proudly presents Rewind Fast Forward, a podcast where we chat with filmmakers about their work and the future of the Canadian cinema. My name is Thom Ernst. Welcome. Today's guest is Sean Garrity. Zoe and Adam is one of the most powerful films I have seen in recent memory, taking a dramatic and risky twist on the issue of birthrights, parenting, and the deceptive line between love and hate. It's the third feature film from Sean Garrity, who we speak with today on Rewind Fast Forward. His first feature, Inertia, earned him the Best Canadian First Feature Film at the 2001 Toronto International Film Festival. His films range from suspense to comedy, from sexual farce to family-friendly. His movies are often fiercely independent, and yet, as he proved with the commercial success of the 2015 romantic comedy After the Ball, highly marketable. Join me and Sean Garrity as we talk from his home in Winnipeg about independent filmmaking, working out west, and the importance film festivals have for Canadian filmmakers. Sean, it is great to see you again. Even though everything has been virtual lately, we could do this now because you're in Winnipeg, right? At this moment?
Yep.
Well, let's start there because this surprised me a bit, and it's in your hashtag on your emails and things like that. I knew you had Winnipeg bones, but I thought you were a Toronto boy.
No, I mean, I have always been a Winnipeg boy, and certainly when I lived in Toronto for many years and worked there and made films there, often film crews would say to me, hey, give us a call for the next one. Even if it's in Winnipeg, man, it doesn't matter. Like I think I carried around some aura of pierogies and whatever it is that Winnipeg exudes that sort of let people know that I was from here. And when we had moved to Toronto, we did so because my wife got a gig out there.
And what does she do?
She's a researcher. She's a PhD in psychology, and she does research into nefarious experiments. And so we moved to Toronto on the idea that we'd be there for like a couple years, and then we'd go home. But as Toronto does, 7 years later, we were still there. Still renting a little place because we were like, this is our last year. This is for sure. This is our last year, which we kind of said repeatedly for 7 years. But then at the end of that stretch, she got offered a lovely research position back home. So we moved home again.
So this is good now. I mean, because filmmaking is of that. Maybe it's just Canadian filmmaking, but you can move. You can be a nomad and still do the stories, make the films you want. Is that universal with filmmakers, or might that be specifically Canadian?
No, I think it's, and you really see it in the offshore American, the runaway productions that kind of fuel a lot of our production economy. People just making the film wherever, and without getting too off track into a talk about economics, I think a lot of the tax credit incentives that are being offered by provinces across Canada and now states across the United States as well are a testament to the fact that films can kind of be shot everywhere. And you're in a kind of an economic scenario, I think, right now where producers are kind of shopping for the best tax credit setup to shoot their films. And we'll see projects go ahead here in Winnipeg that are set in like mountains or at like Oceanside or something, and you just kind of look at it and you're like, do they know what Winnipeg looks like? But with CGI, and now you can buy stock footage from anywhere, it's actually pretty easy to put them together. I guarantee you that movie that you watch that's based in whatever Washington State was probably not actually shot in Washington State.
Right. So is this making it easier for filmmakers? Certainly Canada, when I was a young man, you were you're not even born at that point, but it was really difficult and I'm not saying it's a breeze for Canadians to make film now, but it was really difficult, and location certainly was difficult. And certainly not until like Police Academy movies started to be shot up here did they start switching Toronto to look like New York, etc. I mean, landscape and those things are important. Is it easier now then to get your film made?
Well, I think it is, and certainly, the years that I was living in Toronto, most of the films that we shot in Winnipeg. We'd shoot them in Winnipeg, and then we'd finish them in Toronto. So I'd write them in Toronto. We'd fly out to Winnipeg. We'd shoot it here. We'd fly back to Toronto to sort of finish it. I did one film, as you know, called My Awkward Sexual Adventure, where we shot the film in Winnipeg, and most of the story of that film happens in Toronto. So we're shooting Winnipeg for Toronto. But then at the very end of the process, something that I do when I make all my films is I set 2 days aside just before we lock picture and editing to go out and collect little second unit shots that we need to sew scenes together and add little bits and, the cut in of the purse going down or whatever, that kind of thing. And one of the things that we needed for Awkward that we had been missing was kind of an establishing shot of Winnipeg, which we ended up shooting out at Danforth and Broadview. So in that movie, Winnipeg plays Toronto and Toronto plays Winnipeg. And I think we're just in an era where the way that you contextualize things and the way that you play the sound of things, and you can really make anywhere look like anywhere.
Yeah. Excuse my ignorance, but this does sound very kind of odd. I mean, if you're going to Winnipeg, I guess you don't want to go back to shoot the shots that you've forgotten, and it's cheaper to shoot them here, but it does sound like kind of working backwards or against each other. I mean, why go to Winnipeg to shoot Toronto? And, I'm sure there's a very logical explanation.
Oh, yeah, it's all money. It's all, like everything in film. In the end, it's all money. So yeah. It's, I think Winnipeg right now is the best place in Canada to shoot film. I think they have the very best incentives and probably the most supportive municipal and provincial kind of government setups for film. Like the province of Manitoba is really going to town on encouraging movies to come and shoot here. And it's one of the reasons that I think the province punches so far above its weight in terms of, we have a very tiny population, overall in Canada, but we shoot way more film than we should given our tiny population. We make more film here than Alberta makes, and they have 4 times as many people as we do. And it's just a very active government on a number of fronts, most importantly for movies, economic, to attract films to come and shoot here.
I am fascinated by this concept of Winnipeg as the sort of hotbed of filmmaking right now. I mean, whether it's actually a lot is going on or the incentives are just there. Because I don't know if as people here in Toronto, the way we can be sort of centralized city, we are, the center of Canada attitude, recognizes that. And is that wall starting to break down? Is the idea of moving outside of Toronto and Vancouver, the other sort of film hotspot, are those walls starting to fall down? And Winnipeg, Alberta, all those places starting to see their films being made?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of 2 questions really, because I've always felt like there is the industry of filmmaking, which includes television, which includes Hallmark movies and everything else that's getting made, Avengers films and everything else, which is kind of one thing. And then there's, Canadian auteurs making our own movies. And I'm not sure that there's a whole bunch of overlap between those things.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like as a Canadian auteur trying to get my films made, that I'm kind of riding my bicycle underneath a giant expressway. And you talk to people about how film is going in Canada, but what they're really talking about is all the traffic up on the expressway ahead, which is lots of money and lots of activity and lots of huge shows. But how much of that really filters down to our ability to sort of tell stories about who we are and where we live? I'm not sure how much of cross-play there is between those 2 things. Certainly, I think to answer the first part of your question, yeah, there is a lot of there are a lot of much larger productions now shooting out here. and especially because, you know, Saskatchewan killed their film industry a little while ago. I think a lot of that work came to us. And because over the years we've had giant productions, you know, Capote, Shall We Dance, these massive films that have shot here and have gone on to do great things, and kind of broken down the myth maybe that, you know, you can't really get a good crew in Winnipeg, or you can't get good locations in Winnipeg, or you can't get good production value here, which of course are myths. I mean, you can get all those things here. And when you look at the relative cost of production, it really is a no-brainer, as long as you're willing to take that stopover flight from LA. That's our one weak spot, is that there's no direct flights from LA. Right? Because a lot of these guys want to shoot, and, you know, actors and producers alike, they want to bop up on a plane, supervise a little bit of production, bop back home again. And when you're shooting in Winnipeg, it's a bit of a thing, because you got to either go through Minneapolis or Denver or Vancouver or somewhere to get here.
See, these are the things I think that when you want to be a filmmaker, you don't want to have these things sort of lurching in your mind. You've got the creativity going. You know, you are an auteur, and you do get like your voice out there and heard. And then yet I was looking at all your lineup of films, and I will admit I haven't seen every single one of your films. I've seen a lot.
What?
I know. I'm so embarrassed by this. I completely I would probably have to resign from the TFCA if that ever got out.
Yeah, Moira will have to cut that part out.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, but I remember, well, let me jump back to the first Sean Garrity film I saw, and the reaction I had when I saw this film. It was a film, and you know what? I'm gonna set up the plot for you, and then you're gonna know what film it is, and then people could, you know, I don't want to say too much because I want people to see this movie. But it was about a young couple trying to get pregnant, and they go on a camping trip. Now, I was working when I saw this film. I was working as the producer of Saturday Night at the Movies on TVO, and I was challenged by to come up with a independent Canadian film that I thought was powerful and thought-provoking. And my God, your film, this one just nailed it. Like, I was emotionally torn. I was you know, I was glued to the screen to see what the outcome was. I was angry at the characters, but understood why they were doing what they were doing. And then you go to my sexual, you know, my awkward sexual, sorry, you can help me out with adventure. These things. Yes. Adventure, thank you. I was going to say experience. And that would be my film. But then you get to something that's light and then After the Ball, which is something completely different. So trying to categorize you as an auteur, as an independent filmmaker, is a difficult thing to do, Sean.
It is, you know, and I don't know if that's a boon or a bane. I certainly, one of the things that I often think about attracts me to the film industry and to being a filmmaker is an undiagnosed case of ADD, you know, and this desire. When you're a filmmaker, there's a period of time where you're looking for ideas, and there's another period of time where you're developing stories, and there's another period of time where you're financing and putting packages together and taking meetings, and then you're in prep, and then you're in production, and then you're in post, and then you're dealing with music. And like over the course of a year, month to month, it's like you're never really doing the same job. So for those of us with short attention spans who need constant kind of stimulation, being a filmmaker is the best possible job you could have, because you're never, like, you're not like a mailman doing the same thing in December as you're doing in March. And I think that to a certain extent has extended to my choice of material. And, you know, and once I do, for example, like Zoe and Adam, the film you're referring to, which is a darker, much darker piece, and we were going for a very specific kind of sort of pseudo faux documentary kind of aesthetic with it, and trying to update that aesthetic. We were very interested in at the time, this idea that it's no longer, candid eye NFB 1960s, like a French film like The Class tried to emulate to get that aesthetic. We sort of thought, no, it's 2009, man. The new kind of documentary aesthetic is a YouTube video. It's a homemade handy cam or cell phone made video. So let's do it in that kind of a style to try to get at that feeling of a documentary. But as soon as I was finished that film, which was a very hands-on, low budget film, I kind of felt like, okay, I'm not interested in revisiting that now. Like whatever I do next, I want it to be very different. And so in fact, My Awkward Sexual Adventure, we had some millions of dollars and a full crew, and it was a much bigger production and a much lighter show. And it was kind of, in a sense, the antidote to what I had just done. And as soon as I finished, My Awkward Sexual Adventure, I felt like, okay, I don't want to do comedy now. Like I just did a comedy. So when I went on to the next film, Blood Pressure, which was a thriller, again, a very different kind of film. And so that's kind of been the way that I've created my films. And I think it makes me less, my agent tells me this all the time, less saleable as a product, because what kind of films do you make? When I'm asked that question, I end up saying, well, I make films about people doing things. That's the extent. I mean, what else is there in common between all these movies? I don't even know.
Well, there's certainly the aspect of male-female relationships. I think that is through all of them. But it's funny. You see something like Zoe and Adam, which again, I can't tell you. The way that film hit me was just like, I cannot talk about it enough. It was really, really powerful. And I followed that one up immediately with Blood Pressure. And so I didn't have my sexual awkward adventure.
Your experience, yeah.
Experience, yeah. I knew God, still going through them. So I didn't have that to buffer in between. So when after The Ball came, which is really light,
yes,
I could commercial even, and I think it was a commercial success for you particularly.
Yeah, it was for sure.
It just blew my mind, because I went, well, this guy has gone to a different place yet again. You kind of answered that, but what was it that because you didn't write after The Ball, did you?
Well, yes and no. I mean, in the world of the Writers Guild, only Writers Guild writers are allowed to get credit for a movie. So on that movie, there were many, many, many rewrites that were done. And by many, I'm talking, I mean, I was only on the movie for about 3 months before we actually went to camera, 3 or 4 months. And in that period, I felt like we rewrote it about 20 times.
Wow.
I think I actually counted it to 21 rewrites. And I did some of them, and we brought in other writers to do some of them, and some of them were the result of comedy punch-ups. But the Writers Guild writers were the ones that get the credit, because it's a Writers Guild film.
Right.
And so there was a lot of input that I had into the writing of that film. But you're right when you say that the conception of it at the beginning, because it was in development for like 2 years before they brought me on board. That concept of kind of a Cinderella myth transplanted into a trans, gender adventure in the fashion world was not my concept. That was one that they kind of brought me on for, and they brought me on because of My Awkward Sexual Adventure. And they had a script that they didn't internally think was very funny, and they wanted it to be funnier. And so they said, well, let's hire a guy who does funny. And so thank God that they saw My Awkward Sexual Adventure and not Zoe and Adam, because otherwise I wouldn't have got the gig,
story.
Right? Yes, very different. But so that's kind of how I was. That was literally a phone call. Do you want to start work on this on Monday? Kind of a project.
From Don? Did it come from Don? What is Don
Carmody? Yes, yeah. Sir. And so, I always say, when Don Carmody calls you and says, hey, do you want to direct a movie? There's only one answer to that question.
Exactly. Exactly, and I think yeah, he is. I don't know if people aren't in the film industry and are just liking film, they may not recognize that name, but he is the I'm trying to think of an American like this. There's one that we can't name who fell from grace, but he is one of the he's one of the big ones,
Oh
or
yeah,
the big one in Canada.
here's a guy who discovered Bill Murray when he produced Meatballs, right?
Yeah,
When he produced Porky's, which was the most successful English Canadian film of all time until just recently, actually. And I've always actually thought that I would love to write a book or do a documentary about Don Carmody and his history in making films in Canada, because it's like the history of Don and his movies is in a way the history of English Canadian cinema, because he started in the at the very beginning, and he went through the whole tax shelter years, the dentist film years, and then changed as the industry changed, and has always kind of been at the forefront. And oh my God, when you sit down and listen to the stories that he has accumulated over the years, it would be the most entertaining documentary. It would be the best book, I tell you. He's a guy who's just got a wealth of fascinating experience under his wing.
Yeah, I think that would be worthwhile, you writing that. Those Winnipeg winters can get really, really cold. And I think sitting inside and writing a book on Don would be perfect. I do want to focus on your career and where you got started and at what point actually the process gets fun, because you talked about everything you have to do from writing to finding the money it sounds like you wear everyone's hat. At what point does the filmmaking become fun?
I think it's the funnest when you finish a stage and you go on to the next stage, because it's always like, when I'm writing a movie, like I'm writing a bunch right now. I find it a slog, and writing is so difficult, and I'm constantly reminded of that quote from who's the author who just passed away. I'm trying to think of his name.
Oh, John le Carre?
No, Philip Rothman.
Philip Roth died?
Yes. Yeah. And he always said, if you say you love writing, either you're lying or you're not a writer. And I love that quote and find it to be very true for me. And so when I'm finished writing and we're moving into financing, I'm always very excited. I find that really fun. And then once we start financing, and we've been financing for a while, I get dragged down by it. And I'm like, oh God, I wish we weren't financing already. And when we finish financing and we're moving into actually like finding the locations and casting actors, I'm like, all jazz. We're moving into prep. This is so much fun. Until prep has been going on for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to get out of prep. I'm so bored with it. And so I like the funnest parts I find are those transitions when you feel the project kind of expanding and moving forward and getting bigger and beginning to take on a life of its own and become its own thing. There's always a point, usually it's actually somewhere in prep, where I feel like, okay, the film has now I've given birth to it. It's become bigger than me. And if I were to get hit by a bus, given all the money and the insurance and everything that's been going on with this film, someone else would have to take it over and finish it. Like, the film is now a thing independent of me. And that's always an exciting step. So I find that the transitions to all the steps, right down to like the sound mix and the final delivery at the end of the process. And of course, that moment where you take it out and you start showing it to people and interacting with audiences and press, like every one of those steps feels really exciting when you get into it. And it's really a very fun step. But I think if I had to focus on one part, if some alien race came down and said, okay, Garrity, we've decided that you can no longer do everything. You can only do one part. Working with actors on set, for me, that's the highlight of the whole thing.
That's great. What a totalitarian aliens you have.
Yeah, my aliens always are very interested in me and what I'm doing, and restricting.
Well, no, but not just that, but they're saying you can only do one thing. I mean, back off, man. You guys aren't even from this planet. Well, maybe now I'm starting to sound xenophobic. So
And what kind of aliens, like, the president of the United States would be like, wait a minute, you came down here to talk to a Winnipeg filmmaker about what? Why are you here again?
Well, see, now I like them. Now I like those aliens who understand that cinema is probably more important than what's going on in the White House. And I assume, or in the Parliament. So backtracking a bit, because this fascinates me when you're going to be a filmmaker and you start making your short films, which seems to be the case in Canada. I don't know if directors in the States, I find that they are, editors and cameraman, and then they become filmmakers after that. In Canada, you'll see a whole list of short films before you come up to your first movie. Do you make a film at the beginning just to make a film, or do you have to have something that you say, this is a voice, this has to be voiced, this particular story, whether it's short or longer, it needs to be voiced? Or are you just looking for a project to get that first film made?
No, I think certainly in the case of short films, and in a lot of features, there it is the latter. It is a question of a story comes to you, or a character comes to you, and you kind of go like, oh my God, I have to, I have to tell that. And so I actually, because I've made a lot of short films, and after making my first 6, I actually asked my wife to stop me from making any subsequent short films. I was like, if I come up with another idea for a short film, tell me tell me I'm an idiot and I shouldn't do that, and I should stop pursuing it, and I should move on with my life. Because short films they cost so much money, and they're so difficult to make. And then there's no back end. Like, they don't show in theaters, they don't play on TV, there's no way to make money off of them. They're just these kind of hobbies in a way. But they can eat up as much of your life as a feature. It takes almost as long to make them as it does to make a feature. But you're left with kind of nothing at the end. But nonetheless, even though I had her for my last 4 short films, because I made 10, for all 4 of those last ones, she was like, hey, wait, I'm supposed to tell you to not make this movie, to stop. But you kind of get a sense of like, no, but this one I have to tell this story. This one is like, I have this idea and I love it, and I feel like it has to sort of have a life, but it's not, I can't stretch it into a 90-minute story. It's not a 90-minute story. This is a 10-minute story.
Yeah, there's a lot of feature films that don't recognize that they're short films.
Yes.
But there's a lot of short films that need to be longer. That you want it to be longer, and that happens quite frequently. And I thought at first that maybe there was a link between Blind and Borealis.
Oh yeah, that's the same movie.
Yeah. So in some cases, there is the short, you get it out there and you're going, yeah, this story is worth looking at further.
Yes. So in the case of Blind, I mean, I made Blind, and I'm very proud of that film, and I think it works great as a 10-minute short film. And my frequent collaborator, Jonas Chernick, was like, hey, this could be a feature. And I was like, yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like it's a 10-minute story. I don't know whether you get 90 minutes out of that story. And he sort of pitched some ideas on me, and I wasn't convinced. And he said, let me try and write it. Let me just take a shot at writing something and see what we think. And I was reticent, but I was like, yeah, man, if you want to, okay, yeah, knock yourself out, I guess. And so he brought me back something where he'd flushed out he'd added characters and created that whole B line with the guy with his gambling issue and the loan sharks and it turned it into I think quite a workable feature. And a big part of the process for me in making Borealis after Blind was to kind of disassociate myself from the idea that we were remaking Blind. Like, I really had to do a psychological trick on myself to kind of go, this is not the same movie. This is a totally different beast. It's its own story. These characters are not the same characters, and the connections that I had to those characters in Blind, I have to sever those connections to make this film properly.
And it worked. I mean, you could see both films and not feel like you're repeating yourself. So, the idea of a short film as a calling card, yay, nay?
Oh, of course, yeah? Absolutely, yay. I would like to add to the list that you kind of made of Hollywood filmmakers and where they come from. The Hollywood filmmaker who comes from, it seems increasingly, making music videos.
Yes.
And I think, while that happens in Canada as well, we tend to make music videos for that local band that, strives to find radio play and maybe has a bit of a following on Spotify. Whereas a lot of Americans end up making music videos for Beyonce or Drake or something. And so it gives them that kind of star power to go into their first feature. Whereas I think in Canada, we don't have that as much. And so we end up having to do short films as well as music videos in order to prove that we can, that we can put a story together. I know a guy locally who just finished his first feature, very exciting filmmaker, who made, critically acclaimed short films for years that played at, Rotterdam and Berlin and, new films in New York. And, but they were very, they had a language of experimental cinema that kind of characterized them for a lot of critics. They weren't necessarily experimental cinema, but the way that they were shot and sound mixed and stuff made them feel, I think, more experimental than what the filmmaker intended. And so he found that at one point he had to make a short film that could essentially show that he could shoot in color and he could deal with actors and he could move a camera around to cover a scene in a way that would, be a cinematic language that the majority of people would understand. And he did this great short film where he had a very short story that he replayed 6 times in the language of a Hitchcock, in the language of a Fellini, in the language of a Lars von Trier. And he kind of had this 6-part short film that was so clearly and very hilariously a calling card for, like, guys, I do experimental sort of cinema, but look, I can do anything that you need me to do.
Wow. It does sound not just like a calling card, but it sounds like a sizzle reel that he did.
Yeah.
And I would love to see that. I'm gonna look that up. Do you care to name the filmmaker?
Yeah, it's Deco Dawson.
Okay, actually, I do know that name, and I've seen a lot of his films, and he's great. I think, you know what? I did an article on him once.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time when everyone was writing about what he was doing, when he was pumping out a lot of shorts and they were playing all over the world in various sections. He's one of Winnipeg's great filmmakers, one of our great exports. He's still here. I shouldn't say he's an export. He's still here, but his work travels around the world.
Right. Yeah. I guess the product is the export. In that case, this is I'm fascinated by your career, and we talked about the variations and the different angles you took, and you talk about Deco's work being experimental somewhat. I remember thinking that about Blood Pressure. That there's an experimental aspect to this movie. I know it's been a few years since I've seen it. Am I remembering it? But I seem to remember that it's Jonas was in that.
Jonas was also in that, yeah, and Tatiana Maslany, and a lot of that was one that we shot in Toronto. So I mean, it's an interesting question, because I am one of the poorest sort of analyzers, if you will, of my own work. Sometimes, as we talked about earlier, when people say, what's the similarity between your films, I actually don't know what the similarity is. But for this new one, I propose we never see each other again after tonight. When I was talking to some prospective producers about it locally, to sort of partner with me, the first pair of producers I went to, they read the film and we met at a cafe, and they were like, well, it's certainly a Sean Garrity film, that's for sure.
Funny.
And I was like, I thought to myself, what does that mean? Yeah. But I think part of it might come from, in Winnipeg, in the land of the Winnipeg Film Group, in the land of Guy Madden, there is a kind of, I think our marker for what experimental film is much further to the left than it is in the rest of the country. Like for us, I think a film that we would look at and go, oh yeah, it's pretty commercial. And I've had this happen where I made a film that I thought was very commercial. We're trying to sell it in the States, and we're getting all sorts of feedback from buyers about, yeah, experimental isn't really what we do down here. And I was like, but what? That's a totally commercial film. What are you talking about? and so you could actually be right on the money there with Blood Pressure. That whereas I actually felt that was quite a commercial film.
Yeah.
There are probably elements from experimental cinema that I borrow, having been a product of this place, that I put into, I think, a lot of my films, thinking that it makes them more interesting, like cooking with a certain spice because you're from a certain place.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And it did make whatever you did do with Blood Pressure, I do think was interesting. And again, another film that I was completely hooked on. You know, you have done kind of what Blood Pressure was a suspense film. Certainly, I would say Zoe and Adam was a suspense film.
Yes.
I don't know if people would normally sit there and watch that movie and say, yeah, it's a suspense thriller. The layers of that movie are so many. Have you ever considered a genre like a horror film or something? Or even when after the ball, I thought Sean Garrity could do a musical if he wanted, because
that's so interesting you say that.
Oh, because there's one in the works, is there?
Because there's one that we're looking at. I mean, this new film that I have out now, I Propose We Never See Each Other Again After Tonight. As you know, of my 29 cast members, 20 of them were Filipino Canadians.
Yeah.
Because we have a very, very significant community here. There's actually a significant community all across Canada, although you wouldn't know it from how many Filipinos we see on TV and in our movies. But it's a very large community in this country. In Winnipeg, 1 out of every 10 people is Filipino. And so, everyone grows up with lots of Filipino friends and, going to Filipino social events. And so I felt like it was really important to show that in the movie. But one of the things that also is a bit of a stereotype of the Filipino community, certainly in Winnipeg, is how musical everybody in that community is. And in the case of this film, without exception, every one of my leads, and I'm going to my top 5 leads here, my Filipino leads, have a music career to which their acting career is second.
Wow.
Like all 5 of my leads are musicians, songwriters, singers first. One of them's on Broadway. Well, not right now because Broadway's temporarily off.
Yeah, closed, but
yeah, but she'll go back as soon as they're back up again. She's the only Canadian in this massive Broadway show called Six.
I love Six. Is she the one? Is she Anne Boleyn? Does she?
Yes,
sing?
she's the Filipino Canadian girl, right?
Oh my God! My daughter is so in love with her.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Anyway,
that's amazing.
A great song. That music is fantastic.
So you see, it's also a thing where I'm dealing with these actors and thinking to myself the whole time I'm making this movie, man, I should put a song in here somewhere. Like all these guys could chime in and they're incredible singers and they could harmonize with each other. Like, between takes while we're lighting, these guys are in the basement singing these 4-part harmony just to keep themselves amused. And so with a lot of people in the Winnipeg Filipino community, we started getting talking about, would it be cool to make a musical? And as you know, Tom, because we've talked about it, my career, I was a bass player for 10 years before I started making films. I am a musician by trade. So, and having come from music videos, I've always thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have a musical where instead of a big dance number, when a song comes up, we kind of use the language of music videos, which I've never really seen before. And I think that a way of kind of joining those two forms, the feature film and the music video, in a kind of a musical. And then I come across this community that's just got, music, pouring out of every orifice. And I was like, we should really, it feels like it would be dumb to not do this.
Yeah.
So we've got something in the works.
Okay. A suggestion that you did not ask for. Don't leave out the dancing.
Oh, what? There's specific dancing in music videos. We'll put a little bit of dancing.
Okay, a little bit. That's, like I always like, nothing too athletic, nothing to look like, hey, you guys are just doing gymnastics, but anyway, I'll leave the directing to you. You don't tell me what questions to ask. I won't tell you where to have the dance numbers. I will tell you this. I have two sort of hopes for in my life. And I'd say this to every single director I talk to be in a horror film. I want to be a victim in a horror film, and I want to be in a musical. But know that I can't sing or dance. I just want to.
Wait a minute. What do you want to be the guy who stands at the side with the newspapers and watches as a dance breaks out in front of your newspaper stand?
I want a number, a big number. I didn't, just because I can't do it doesn't mean I shouldn't do it.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%. No, 100%.
Uh, so yeah, I think one of the great pleasures of my life is that people like Sean Garrity are acquaintances, and if I saw you at a party, I could come up and chat with you and stuff like this. This also seems like a unique Canadian thing that our filmmakers are, and you as a filmmaker, how close do you feel you are with your audience? You know, we don't necessarily have that huge wall between audiences and the creators here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there is a constant for me with my movies, a constant desire among the other considerations, and most of which have to do with content and character and whatever else. But there's also a consideration for me to, I think, expand the audience that we are reaching. Because I do think that there is a kind of a constant Canadian audience, and they come out to the Toronto Film Festival, and they come out to, in every city where my film plays, you kind of know what theater you're going to play in that city to reach that audience, because you know who they are, and you know that they listen to, CBC. I'm not going to try and get an interview on a rock station in, Vancouver, because that's not going to reach my audience. I'm going to try to get to CBC Vancouver, because the people who are fans of Canadian films and my work specifically, that's where they tune in. And so there is that connection there. But I think, if we are to survive as an industry, and if we are to thrive as an industry, one of the things that I'm constantly looking at is how can I also break out of that, and how can I reach, people who maybe don't normally watch Canadian cinema? Because what do I know? I know what I like, and that doesn't mean anything, right? I like certain foods that nobody else likes. But I mean, I love a lot of Canadians. There's a lot of Canadian films that I think, oh my God, that's like so much better and deeper and more affecting than most of what I see coming out of Hollywood. Why is nobody seeing this stuff? Like, why is nobody watching it? And I think part of it is that we kind of, we ghettoize ourselves a little bit by the way that we play ourselves, and where we play ourselves, and how we advertise ourselves. I think there's a process there of, by doing grassroots publicity campaigns, for example, I think we sort of maybe stick ourselves in a bit of a box and deny ourselves access to a wider audience.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That I was listening to you talk about going to CBC, and you're not going to go to a rock station, and of course my mind says, the uninformed mind on this says, why not go to the rock station? If it weren't for people telling me on rock stations that I should be watching these films and stuff like this, and then also having a deep interest in cinema help too, but I'd still be seeing Burt Reynolds' Cannonball Run movies and listening to them in my top 5 favorite movies. We need to be challenged. We need to know that there's a different type of film, that there's a different way to tell the story. I'll just go a little bit further on that, and then and see what how you respond to this. It's foreign films. It's not always easy initially to engage yourself in a foreign film if you've been raised on a certain type of movie. But after a while, the pacing, the understanding of the film, how that story is told, becomes more familiar. And the more familiar it becomes, and I would say this about musicals too, the more familiar you are with the song and dance aspect, the less obscure it is, and the easier it is to comprehend. And I think that you as a filmmaker, is that not part of what you need to do with your films? Is
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, it's a really big question with a lot of different, aspects to it. I think, we recognize, a lot of us, and a lot of us, not only who are working in film, but making films and watching films, and people who are working in government, administering films, there is a recognition on the part of a lot of us that it's important to have a voice in the national conversation about who we are and what we stand for. And I think that is kind of what cinema and what television does. It talks about us and who we are, and that's really important. And we're one of the few countries in the world that, for example, in theaters, there's less than 2%, I think, of films at a theater are Canadian films, English Canadian films, and so it's like almost like we don't have a chance to participate in that conversation.
Right.
And I think there is an aspect of our films, which is that they talk about the experience of living in Canada that makes them automatically accessible to a wider Canadian audience than we are presently accessing.
Right.
And even though the cinematic language might be slightly different, like this new film, I'm talking about, a Mennonite boy and a Filipino girl in the middle of winter in Winnipeg who fall in love pushing a stranger's car out of the snow. In the prairies, that has really flown. Like, that has really played. That pitch alone has gotten a lot of people on board to come and see the movie who maybe wouldn't normally watch Canadian cinema, because there's something there right away that they're like, I can relate to that. I sometimes think we do ourselves a disservice in Canada by underplaying the Canadiana. By doing the old, let's not show the license plates and let's switch the mailboxes so that they're blue and so that we can sell this in the States and make a sale to Netflix later, and that it's kind of generic anywhere USA, although we secretly know it's Canadian. I wonder if we are cutting off ourselves at the knees there a little bit.
Wow. I mean, the idea of having to appeal to an American market, financially that makes sense. But as a filmmaker and an artist, I can understand why you'd want to, to meet it financially, of course, but then also to tell our own story as natural and as real as possible. Like, I mean, recently I saw a movie that I was kind of enjoying with my family, and then all of a sudden my daughter said, "Hey, that's the Eaton Center." And I went, well, damn it, then why isn't it Toronto? Why isn't it the Eaton Center? It took me out of the film completely. And that was an American film.
Well, and there is this thing where, if you watch a film like Analyze This and the completely unnecessary sequel, Analyze That, they play on this idea in the film, and you could almost hear how they pitched it, at whatever studio launched it, where it's like, it's a Jewish psychotherapist from New York, and it's like an Italian street smart gangster from New York, and they get together, and people right away click into those stereotypes and understand a great deal about those characters and the subcultures within New York, because America has been so much more successful than we have at exporting those local characters. Like, when I'm trying to sell my new film in Winnipeg and saying, she's Filipino, he's Mennonite, Winnipeggers are like, oh, I love it. I haven't even told them the story yet. They're like, I love it, right? Because we're playing on those characters that we all know. But why aren't we doing a better job at exporting that, at playing those characters and characterizing our films as like, this is the story of an Italian guy in North Toronto who doesn't speak English very well, and somebody from Gerrard East, and they get together and it's a love story and it's about Toronto. And it's but like, without, like, I don't know why we're not doing more of that.
Right. As and I guess it's going to take time again. It's going to take filmmakers, with your kind of voice, to sort of establish that there is a Gerrard Street character. You say Gerrard Street character to someone in New York, they're not going to know what you're talking about. You say New York character to someone in
anywhere,
India, and they know exactly what you mean.
That's it. Yeah. Right. And I think there's a lot of stories. A lot of people looked at my new film and sort of said, wow, it feels like there's this, I think the Winnipeg Free Press actually wrote, that feels like there's this wonderful, interesting world that's been hiding in plain sight, right? The world of, I personally, this is just me going off on a tangent now, and you can stop me. Personally, I find the immigrant story, the bicultural reality is just a fascinating story. The characters, multi-layered characters dealing with all sorts of cultural stuff, which is also philosophical stuff, which is also stuff about how we live and what's the right thing to do. And just these layered, like, how come there's never a story that we see that it takes place in Richmond, BC? Like, what an interesting place that is. Mm-hmm. Where is that story?
Yeah.
Right.
Unless they're documentaries like that do exist, but you're right. A dramatic story on that.
But I think there is a sense, for me anyway, that Canada is, it's such a rich place with so many different subcultures and so many interesting stories and so many interesting characters. And for so long, I think we've told ourselves stories about ourselves that are kind of a mythologized 1970s, white middle-class Canada.
Right.
And Canadians are just not interested in that story. or by and large. We could be telling so much more, I mean, our stories could be so much more varied because Canada is so much more varied. And the importance of kind of tapping into that and being unapologetic about it. Like there's a whole thing. I mean, I mentioned Richmond, BC. There's a whole thing that's been going on there for the past, 5 years, where skyrocketing housing prices are being blamed on Chinese immigrants.
Yeah.
Where's that film? That's a fascinating story, and how those cultures kind of mix together out there, and the idea of relating to one another. I mean, when two people get to know each other, and of course, as you say, a lot of my films are man-woman films, and I do find that really interesting, because we're trying to get to know each other in such a deep way when it's a romantic relationship, and when you've got a whole different culture behind each one of you, it's just so much richer, and there's so much more there to delve into it and to investigate and to play with. And it's not like you're, you know what I mean? Like you're making that up. Like that's a very Canadian story.
But what about can a white director and a white writer tell these stories without implying sort of another form of sort of
voice appropriation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love that question. It's something that I think about way too much. I spend a lot of time thinking about that, because I do feel like there is a kind of a push-pull at the center of these two ideas. One being, we want more diverse stories. We want more diverse characters in our stories in this country. But the other being, we don't want to be appropriating the voice of people who should be telling their own stories. And so where's the line there, and finding, and it's very amorphous. It's a big gray area, I think, in the middle. And so I spent a lot of time looking into what's the best way to approach this, so that, because I really don't think the answer is, okay, I'm a white guy, so I guess I only tell stories about white people now. That's not the result that we're after with this conversation, right? In this film, for example, I mean, I grew up with lots of Filipino friends, going to lots of Filipino events. And so as a Winnipegger, you sort of feel like, I know Filipinos. But before I wrote the story, I sat down and I did a whole bunch of research with a lot of Filipino friends of mine and Filipino groups. And then as I was writing the story, I was passing drafts of it by Filipino friends of mine. And when we actually got on set and started shooting scenes where most of the characters, in front of the camera are Filipino characters, when my lead goes home to her family, for example, and everybody on the scene is now Filipino Canadian, and they're speaking a spicy mix of Tagalog and English. Those scenes, I actually relied on my improv chops, because I do a lot of improvisation in my movies.
Yes, you do.
And so I would be like, okay, I'm not writing script for this scene. I have an outline. And I want you guys to kind of show us how this conflict would play out in a Filipino Canadian home in North Winnipeg. And so, you kind of make them co-authors of a lot of the scenes that have culturally specific material in it, so that you're not misrepresenting, and you're not relying on stereotype, and you're not relying on, and the actors who are members of a given, cultural community feel that they have full permission to say, oh, you know what, that's actually not how it would play. Let us show you how it would play. And so it becomes kind of a collaboration,
Is that an easy thing to let go of? Because as a director, there's the control aspect too. I mean, go ahead.
If I had the choice, I would improvise every movie. Like, if I could, I would go without script for every single film. Unfortunately, when you have $2 million or $5 million or something of somebody else's money, they're not very comfortable with that. And I get it. But I always am a huge fan of the performances and the authenticity and the subtlety that actors bring when they are improvising. I think it's in most cases, it's much more affecting than words that I could write. And I think especially when I'm dealing with a community that I didn't grow up in, in the case of this new movie, it's a community that I grew up next to, but not in. I think it's almost essential to involve them collaboratively in representing them and giving them that agency to sort of represent themselves and their own experience within the context of your story. And so this is a way, it's not the only way, obviously, but it's a way that I've kind of found, after thinking about the question that you asked, which is a great question, a lot. about I don't want to engage in voice appropriation, but I do want to have diverse characters on my screen, and I want their experiences as characters to be as authentic as possible. At the same time, I would never try and make a film that sets out to sort of represent an experience. Like, this is the film that represents what it's like to be Filipino in Winnipeg. That film is not my film to make, right? Obviously. But I think, if you have a character who comes from a background that is different from your own, there's a certain responsibility that you have to, as a filmmaker, to make that experience of that character kind of authentic. I don't know if you saw yesterday the Danny Boyle film.
I did.
So
Yeah.
there was a film where you had a main character who was a brown guy, but when he went home to his family, they were sipping tea, and it looked like a British sitting room. There weren't any Indian gods anywhere, and there was nothing about them that wasn't British except for the color of their skin. And you kind of go like, that feels weird. It feels like that director didn't do his homework in properly. Like, if you're gonna make a character who's got Indian background, then make the character have Indian background.
Right. Right. Although I will argue that I think in Britain, the Indian community is very colonialized. So and do a lot, sip tea and stuff. Speaking of a man who's married to an Indian woman and has been to England with their family, there's a lot of tea sipping. But there are also the Indian gods there. So
that's right.
Yeah,
and usually isn't the tea they pour it into the saucer and then drink it out of the saucer? And
no. But I will say the tea is exceedingly sweet. I don't know what they're there.
That's interesting. I used to live in India actually for
how many years?
Just a year. Yeah, I lived in Gujarat, and with an Indian family. I was an exchange student, so I was, and I would drink the tea, and they would be like, no, you pour it into the saucer to cool it down, and then you drink it from the saucer. I was like, okay.
You never did that. I've been to India quite a few times because of my wife's family. That has not happened. That's interesting. You've lived a blessed life, traveling to India, Winnipeg, Toronto,
Japan, Argentina, Mexico.
Oh my Lord.
I've lived, you grow up in Winnipeg, I think, and it's one of the things that unites many of us. You grow up in Winnipeg and you don't see yourself reflected on TV, and you don't see yourself reflected in movies or in print, and you get to be 18 years old and you're like, I am getting out of this place, because everything that I see about the world is something that happens somewhere else, not here.
So I know you're a dad. I know you're a dad. Then what happens when your child gets to being 18 and a Winnipegger? Are you going to help this? I don't know if you have a boy or girl.
Daughter. She's my
daughter. I don't know if you're going to help her sort of see the world, or if you're going to go, because it's hard to let your kids go. We're both parents.
Yes.
So when your kid gets the wanderlust at 18. How are you going to respond to that?
The same way that my parents responded to me. They buy her a really expensive backpack that's fitted to her body, and say, write a postcard, man.
Oh, you got good parents.
I think it's it's funny. It's an interesting question that I think defines to a certain extent for many people the kind of the Winnipeg experience. Like, I think when you grow up in Winnipeg, there's almost a given to a certain extent that when you get to be a young adult, you are going to leave. At some point, you're going to leave. And then whether you come back or not, and most of us do, I think is a separate question. But there is, there's that, I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen Guy Madden's My Winnipeg, the movie.
Yes.
Brilliant movie. And one of my favorite lines from the beginning of that movie is this guy, and he's on a train and he's leaving Winnipeg, and the voiceover says, "This time I'm leaving Winnipeg for good again."
Yeah.
Which I love, but I'm absolutely certain that my daughter, when she is of age, she'll be like, I've been watching the world on TV and through screens, and I've been watching everything that happens that's important. It seems the image of that the world tries to sell us is everything happens in Toronto and New York and London and Paris and Hong Kong and, Tokyo. And so, I think that you got to go out and see that stuff. And then have a realization. I'm not saying my daughter has to do this, but this was me. Have a realization that, like, oh, really, every place is just kind of the same. Ultimately,
isn't it true? It is true, and I mean, and I could relate this back to movies, because we are essentially still talking about movies. I mean, this is what film does. It can, and literature, it can transport you to these places, and they can seem exotic, to use the term correctly. They can seem exotic and appealing, and when you get there, you suddenly go, my feet are still on the ground.
Yeah.
I could still feel the wind. I can still see the sun. There's something, it brings the world together. And I think cinema does that. And of course, travel does that too. But it really makes the world smaller.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's that poem that there is no frigate like a book, that before movies, this idea that you really, I mean, and some of my favorite films, we watch a lot of, my wife is Japanese. We watch a lot of Ghibli in the house, and my daughter watches a lot of Ghibli. And there are very few, I think, filmmakers in line with the Ghibli guys in the sense of creating a world, and that's one of the great things that a movie does, and that I try and do in all my films. I mean, I try and create a very personalized version of Winnipeg, usually, is what I'm most often doing. But it is a world that we create and we present to people. And I think, part of what I do with a lot of my films, especially the new film, is try to remedy, in a sense, that feeling that I had growing up that, Winnipeg's not an interesting place, so I got to get out of here. I had a lot of feedback from press on the new film where, I listened to people on Halifax CBC saying like, wow, this film makes Winnipeg look like a pretty cool place for a romantic comedy. And someone was like, yeah, I think it is a cool place. And as I was listening to that, I was like, yes, yeah, it really can be, if you look at it through the right lens. And I think that's part of what I do maybe with a lot of my films. But I think it gets back to what we were talking about before as well, this question of a national cinema. And one of the things that a national cinema should be doing for us is recontextualizing the Canadian experience to make it feel for a lot of us like a place where we'd love to stick around.
Yeah, that's well said. Well said. We've been chatting for a while, and I do want to say before we sign off and depart, which I'm reluctant to do because it is so nice catching up with you, Sean. I would see you in Kingston Film Festival, other places. I used to be able to see you in the neighborhood. And then you went and changed your hashtag. So I'm enjoying this immensely. But the Kingston Film Festival, I mean, when we're talking about the importance of Canadian film and highlighting Canadian cinema, etc., I mean, I do think, and it's a bit of a self-promotion because obviously this podcast is linked and sponsored by the Kingston Canadian Film Festival. They really are promoting that kind of idea of Canadian cinema or Canadian identity. I don't know exactly how many exclusively Canadian film festivals are out there. But I mean, the idea of this festival, I clearly you're not going to say, oh, it sucks, I hate it, because clearly,
I love
it gives you a venue. But I do want to get to your concept of places like the Kingston Film Festival and other festivals that might really sort of focus on Canadian cinema as a Canadian voice.
Well, I think we're at a stage, I think, unfortunately, where you want to, I think as a filmmaker, I want to get people to see my film, and as they're enjoying the film to sort of go like, oh, wow. And it's Canadian, because I don't think that saying it's Canadian is a real selling point yet. I think that there's a feeling in Canada, which is really unfortunate, that on the part of a lot of people, that if it's a Canadian film, somehow it's second rate, it's not good enough, it's not going to be interesting. Some people would think it's going to be a 3-hour long black and white silent film about a tractor or whatever. But maybe that's a Winnipeg thing. But I think that what's interesting about the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, sometimes I wonder how you guys would do if you took the word Canadian out, if you just programmed Canadian films anyway, and you just did it on the down low. And so people came in and saw these great films and all had the experience of watching it and going, wait a minute, this is a Canadian film. Wow.
Yeah. But then, it does, you get filmmakers like Albert Chin at Kingston, etc. And he's making his film where in China?
I think Hong Kong or China.
Hong Kong or something. So you're watching this film, you think, oh, it's a Hong Kong film. It's not. It's Canadian. Because we are so multicultural and because our voices go beyond, it does mean, like, You don't see a Born Identity movie that takes place in Italy and think it's an Italian film.
No, no.
Yeah.
And there is, I think, a really interesting, like Deepa's films.
Mm-hmm.
People often look at them and say like, oh, well, are those Canadian films? And you go like, well, of course they are. Like nobody in India would have made Water, right? That the perspective on that experience, the perspective that Deepa brings is a deeply Canadian perspective, right? Even though the events are happening in India. And I think that there's something. I've been interested for a long time in the idea of like, well, what if you took an event that happened somewhere, anywhere, pick a place, and you had a French filmmaker and a Japanese filmmaker and a Canadian filmmaker all tell their version of that story. In the differences between the telling of that story, I think you would have a real sense of what the culture of those places are when you take away what the culture of Canada is specifically, when you take away the Mounties and the beavers and the maple syrup, what's the actual, what are we actually talking about when we talk about Canadian culture?
Yeah. I think that's a very good experiment to do.
Yeah. If you got $6 million, let's do it.
All right. Well, we'll see how well the podcast goes. I expect to make about at least $1 million off of this. Sean, as I said, a real pleasure. And I'm so glad that, it'd be great to do this in person, of course, but seeing you right now, you're looking great. I love your attic office.
Thank you.
And I look forward to that musical. And if you don't mind, I will brush up on my, I don't know if is there a song I should learn?
It's Winnipeg has an amazing musical community, like amazing, and so it's all going to be local tunes, man. I got more than I need to choose from already. We'll send you.
Aren't you the guys that made Phantom of the Paradise so popular?
Yes, that's us. That's us.
I talked to Paul McCartney about that. He's Paul McCartney.
Paul Williams.
One of my favorite interviews, Paul Williams, and yeah, he considers himself a Winnipegian.
Oh yeah, we made them all official Winnipeggers. We have the
Winnipeggers
Palooza up here every couple of years, and we love the musicals. We do.
Okay, great. Listen, thanks a lot. Congratulations on your new film. Oh, before we go, we did sort of talk about it, but maybe you have another name you'd like to add to this about a Canadian filmmaker that you are particularly interested in, somebody that you think is up and coming, maybe a new voice. Do you have one? We mentioned.
Oh, so many. I mean, Deco is hardly up and coming. I mean, he's been making films for as long as I have. It's just taken him longer to really have a desire to explore features. And so he's got his new feature that he's working on now. I can't wait till it comes out. I mean, I think, Matthew Rankin is a very exciting filmmaker, originally from Winnipeg. Now he's based out of Montreal, but his new film, The 20th Century, has been conquering the world.
Yeah.
Prize in Berlin and Rotterdam and like everywhere.
It's a strange film though.
It's very Winnipeg in many senses. I mean, you can take the boy out of Winnipeg, but however that saying goes, I think you see a lot of the influence of the Winnipeg kind of experimental approach to filmmaking, kind of ingrained in what Matthew's doing. Well, Matthew's films are very much Matthew's films. And if you watch his shorts, you see how they, he's very much got his own aesthetic. But, I'd say that you can't look at Matthew's aesthetic without, to a certain extent, acknowledging the influence of the aesthetic of Winnipeg.
And cinema. He has a great cinematic language as well. It's on a lot of people I know. It's on their best of list. His film. Yeah,
it's a great film. But I think in terms of just naming them as quickly as I can, the filmmakers that have influenced me, Canadian filmmakers that have influenced me. I mean, Bruce Sweeney. I don't know how much of his work you're familiar with.
Yeah, this relationship movie that he did about 6-7 years ago. I forgot the title. It's so powerful.
They're kind of all relationship movies, right?
Well, right. This one is about 4 different couples.
Last Wedding.
Last Wedding. Oh my God, that's a powerful movie. That's a great movie.
Yeah. I mean, I love all of his movies, and I love his approach, and have been very, very influenced by it in my own approach to sort of dealing with actors. And I think finally, in listing things that I'm kind of inspired by in terms of what's happening in cinema, doing this new film, I Propose We Never See Each Other Again After Tonight, has really exposed me to the artists in Winnipeg's Filipino community in a new way. Because, while I thought I knew that community, I didn't know them as well as I thought. And in making the film, I got to know them a lot better. And there are some really interesting young filmmakers and young storytellers coming up, working their way up out of that community that I think, in the matter of the next couple of years, we're really going to start hearing from. That's very inspiring.
Not to put you on the spot, but would you put yourself in a producer role then, in order to sort of
absolutely
allow this to happen? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I already am talking with a couple of people about some stuff that they've got brewing, and someone who has an idea. We were talking the other day actually about, and I'm helping her find the resources that I hope are the ones that she needs to sort of get a script kind of in shape. And yeah, it is one of the things that I think brings our whole community up. Those of us who have already connections. I can, maybe get on the phone with distributors and buyers that maybe they don't know on a first name basis that would help them get their film to where it needs to be.
Well, Sean, I love your energy. I was sitting here listening to you chat and how you talk about your process and what interests you. And I thought, well, if he brings that energy on set, there's no question as to why his films work. They do work. I continue to look forward to seeing what Sean Garrity does. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. And as the years go by, we will continue to see you at festivals, and maybe we'll be doing a part 2 of this interview, because there's certainly a lot to chat with you about.
Would love to. Thanks for having me, sir.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Sean Garrity for chatting with us. Sean's latest feature, I Propose We Never See Each Other Again After Tonight, is now available to buy or rent on YouTube or Google Play. Rewind Fast Forward is hosted by Thom Ernst and produced with original theme music by Moira Demorest. That's me. Support for this podcast comes from the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, which is situated on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. This podcast is generously funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. For more information, please check us out at kingcamfilmfest.com. Thanks for listening.